As we talk about the idea of do irides change, it's important for us to remember that yes, they do change, but we need to know why they change and how they change. It's not what I was taught 20 years ago or 40 years ago, that's for sure. I'm always amazed at how science moves things forward and how much it changes what we know and how we use what we know. And so let's talk about do irides change? Again, thank you for being with me because we are going to play with this topic. I would love a show of hands or a wave. So if you're with me on Instagram, give me a wave. If you are with me on Zoom, just weigh in on this. Are you familiar with constitutional iridology already? Is that a style of iridology you practice? We've got Katie from Toronto. Yes. And that's great. Thanks, Katie, for being with us. I'd love to know what style of iridology you practice. So here we go. And I'm going to be moving my camera that's focusing on my computer screen closer and further away as we need to. These are the eye pictures of a client of mine. He was 40 years old when we took these, and these were taken with my second iridology camera that I ever owned. This was an 8 megapixel camera. So I want you to have a really, really good look at these and just kind of burn it into your mind's eye to what these look like and how, you know, how the fibers are sitting, what the colors look like. Not so much the colors, because the picture we're going to look at next will be the same eyes, but taken with a different camera. And that instantly nullifies any comparison of color. Just saying. Here are the same man's eyes 18 months later. I'm just going to put that right there. 18 months later. So you look at that and you think, oh, they're bluer. No, the camera changed. But what I can see, and you might not be able to see this because it's going from my computer screen to my phone to you on Instagram. Those of you who are on the webinar live, you'll probably see this a whole lot more easily. But the huge difference here, I'm going to flip back one, is these patches of dark on the images that were taken with my 8 megapixel camera, which was state of the art when I bought it. Truly it was, built by the wonderful Doug Jensen. As compared to what we see here on the pictures that were done with a 24 megapixel camera, these are not dark patches. They are actually splatters of very dark pigment sitting on the eye. We've got it happening in both eyes. And so could you see that change? Those of you on the webinar probably can. I'd love to know if you can. Those of you who are with me on Instagram, can you see that comparison at all? Does it come through because, you know, using a camera phone to share this into Instagram? Can you see the difference in the definition of the darker spots? And Laura says yes, and Jody says yes, very different. Excellent. Thank you for weighing in on that on the Zoom webinar chat. Really appreciate that. So the thing that has changed here is not the eyes. The thing that changed here is the equipment. It's the camera. It's the technology. So this is the difference. Oh, and you can see it on Instagram. Yes, thank you, Harmony Natural Care, for weighing in on that. So this one, again, 8 megapixel, digital, with an incandescent ring flash, which is a yellower flash. This one, 24 megapixels. So I see things with this 24 megapixel that I'd only ever heard about. It's really amazing. But we've got that extra definition, and it's an LED lighting system, which is a bluer lighting system, which makes everything look blue. So when we see those changes, they aren't changes in the eye at all. Those changes are changes in the technology. So that's really important. Here are the eyes side by side. You can see them, and the image that's on the right of your screen is a little bit smaller, but even so, you can see so much more definition with the high resolution, the actual dots of pigment, where on the other image, which is larger, and those, they are not really dots anymore. So there was an 18-month lapse between taking these pictures. And again, the temptation there with a lot of people who practice iridology is to say, oh, cleansing, he must have done some serious work. Oh man, look at the color change, right? When really it was the technology that changed. His eyes are still the very same color, in spite of doing some intense cleansing work and really working on some things with me. So I'm really concerned, and one of the reasons I do this webinar is because there are some ways the irides do change, and we are going to talk about those, I promise you. But I am super concerned about the way so many people on social media talk about how their eyes have changed, that they've gotten lighter, that, you know, they do the before and after pictures and things like that. And no one is stopping to recognize that the skin tones are radically different in color. The sclera color is radically different. We go from that slightly yellowish to a more pinky purpley sclera here. And that is all a function of the lighting and the technology. And so it's so important that we know this. Now, you know, it's really, really difficult, even with this wonderful camera that I bought 2.5 years ago to replace this one. Even with it, it is such a finely tuned instrument that if the batteries are not as charged on the follow-up pictures as they were on the initial pictures, there will be some differences in the appearance of the photos. Just saying. So there are so many variables in photography that we cannot use photography as an accurate way of assessing color change. So that's one thing we really need to pay attention to when we are talking about iridology and when we are talking about changes we see in the irides. So a better question to ask is, what changes can we see in the irides, and what do those changes mean? Okay, because we do know that the irides change, right? We know that. But again, it's not, they don't change in the way that North American iridology has claimed they change for the last 60 years. Okay, and I will swear on a stack of Bibles that that is absolutely true. I've been an iridologist for 40 years. I know, I don't look a day over 12 or over 30, right? So how could I have been an iridologist for 40 years? The first 10 of those years, I was a North American iridologist, as in I practiced the philosophies that were being taught by the names at that time. And I was so frustrated after about that first 10 years that I was ready to throw in the towel and totally walk away from iridology, because I would take my clients, I would put them on cleanses, we would put them on special diets, we would add herbs and vitamins and supplements and change their lifestyle. We would do all of this super hard work, and never once did I see the changes that my iridology teachers had told me I would see. Never once. Even with my own eyes. You know, you'd think after being in this industry for 40 years that my eyes would have some radical differences. Nada. Not one. And I assure you, I feel stronger and healthier today at the age of 60 than I felt when I was 20. And I thought I felt pretty good when I was 20. Right? And so when we look at this, we need to consider if what we have learned is actually accurate. It was that frustration that opened a door for me way back when, like 30 odd years ago, to begin learning constitutional iridology. I'd heard about it at a workshop I had attended, just a little 1-hour presentation where I saw an iris map that was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was so clean and so simple. It was like, holy doodle. So I wrote down the name of the person who designed that map, came back to my office, and I was writing for a newsletter that Stephen Horn published back then. And on the very back, there was an article that talked about this exact kind of iridology that I just spent an hour sitting in learning a little bit about. So I got the byline off there, got the contact information, contacted them, and these were the two men, Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf, who were promoting and teaching the European style of iridology, which is called constitutional iridology. As I studied with them, I got more and more excited because it made sense. I could see how this made sense. So are you ready now to learn about what constitutional iridology teaches about why irides change? You ready to learn that? If you are, give me a yes or a thumbs up or a wave or something to let me know that you are present and accounted for and you're ready to do this. Yay! Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yay. I'm glad you're with me. So, pigment may be acquired or it may become more dense. Now, this is something that I have actually seen in my years as an iridologist, and I have before and after photos. And again, we can't compare absolute color, but you can certainly see when pigment has acquired and deposited. What I've never seen is pigment dissipate or disappear. The saying is the irides accumulate pigment, they do not disperse pigment. The presence of pigment in the eyes is not an indication of acquired toxicity. It is not an indication of something you've done to yourself that you now need to undo. The presence of pigment is inherently determined, and the appearance of pigment is inherently determined. So just as I am slightly reluctant to admit, my hair started turning gray about 6 or 7 years ago, ever so slightly, in my humble opinion. There are things we can do to control a little bit when that shows up, when it starts going gray, but we can't necessarily stop it because it is an inherent predisposition to go gray or white or to lose your hair if you're a guy at some point in time. So when we see pigment appearing in the eyes, it is an indication that this body has that inherent predisposition towards something getting triggered right then. All right, so these are my lovely husband's eyes. Now again, notice the color difference, different cameras. This is the very first camera I ever owned. This was the one built by Doug Jensen. And this was a print, this printed film, did the 4x6 inch prints. And so what you will notice here is that, and you cannot use pupil size from photos, right? Because that is determined by the intensity of the lighting, right? So we can't talk about that at all here, but what we can do is look at other things that may be different. So I want you to just look at this carefully and notice the landmarks. We have a lacuna here with a jut out in the collarette. We have that here with a jut out in the collarette. The lacuna looks narrower in the image on the right because the pupil is smaller. That will affect how lacunae appear. We've got the one coming straight up. We've got the one coming up here. We've got this little pocket of stuff here. We've got it right here. So these are the same eye. We've got this pigment sitting right here. We've got this pigment sitting right here. This pigment is washed out somewhat because of the intensity of the light. Do you notice the one other significant difference? Can you see it? If you can see the significant difference between the image on the left and the image on the right, I'd love it if you would type it in. What do you see that is significantly different where something is in the image on the right that is not on the image on the left? You see it? You see it? What do you see there? Okay, so we've got the same camera, or we've got the same eye. We've got both of these are done with my handheld cameras. Notice the camera wasn't exactly level, so you see some of the markings. They don't line up exactly. We would have to rotate this image slightly counterclockwise to get everything to line up. The line just below the pupil on the left. On the left. So the line, I'm not sure, the skin around the eye is plump on the right. Oh, that's an interesting observation. Okay. Okay. So the one thing that is really hugely different here is, do you see this? We've got this little bit of dark pigment sitting right here from roughly 30 minutes to roughly, well, it actually is very faint, continuing up on to close to about 43 minutes, but it's very intense from 30 to about 38 minutes. Do you see that? So, but it's not here. Can you see that it's not there? That Jody says that's what she was looking at. She didn't know how to describe it. Perfect, Jody. Good observation. Now, this picture was taken when my husband was in his early 40s. He is now in his mid 60s. And so what this tells us is that this has accumulated over time. When we see pigment depositing or accumulating or appearing, however you want to describe that, in the iris, it teaches us two very important things. The color of the pigment teaches us which organ is inherently predisposed to be having challenges that are being triggered. Sometimes those challenges, sometimes that pigment is there from birth. And we know then that those are things that we're going to have to be guarding and protecting and supporting the body right from the get-go. When a pigment accumulates, acquires, or magically appears, it tells us that the organ that puts down this color of pigment is inherently predisposed to be having some issues. And when we look at the location of the pigment, it tells us which other organs are going to be affected. Okay, which other organs are going to have to bear the brunt of the stress of organ number one being out of balance. Is that making sense? So what we see is in my husband's mid-40s, yeah, it was okay. As he's into his mid-60s, this color of pigment tells me liver. And so with that, I look at what are the symptoms that he has now that would correlate and that have been building over the last X number of years that would correlate to his liver being out of balance. And interestingly enough, over the last about 15 years or so, he has developed incredibly itchy skin. And we've addressed it from every which way, including up. And it is still a problem that is activated. We work on that really, really hard with him. All right, let's look at another set of eyes. Are these eyes the same person? Are they the same eye? So we need to do that landmark comparison, correct? So at about 4 to 4:30, and again, I'm going to just play with my phone camera here. There is a little fiber that runs right down here. It's called a transversal. When we look in the image on the left, we have that same transversal in the exact same place. When we look at things like, oh, what else should we pick on in here? There's a little bit of a transversal or an errant fiber up here that is also up here. And those are two unique enough markings that I think we can call that a good comparison. Now, again, I'm going to bring my camera back a bit. As we look at this, and I'll try to hold it steady, that is not my strongest feature. Do you see how so many pigments have acquired? This is the newer image. This is the older image. This is one of my sons. This would have been when he was, just remember how old this child is now. He is 30. So this would have been when he was about 28. And this would have been with that camera when he was about 8 years old. Okay, and look at the difference in the pigment. We've got we've got this one, we've got this one, we've got one right here. We've cut this one off, it would have been tucked just right under the lower eyelid here. This pigment is a little bit heavier. This pigment is a little bit heavier. So again, we've got more acquired pigment as we compare the 20-year-old photos to the new photos. And as we look at that, we need to ask again, what did these changes mean? The color of the pigment tells us what organ is likely causing stress. That is a liver color. The location of the pigment tells us which organs are bearing the brunt of the stress. And so his liver wants to create stress for lots of different parts of his body, which, you know, your liver can do, right? Because your liver does 500 different chemical things and things in your body. And so it can darn well affect whatever it wants to affect. This is not the buildup of toxins, but again, it's genetically or inherently programmed. Right? This is my son, who is a Red Seal chef, and of course, living at home, I controlled the diet. Then he became a rebellious young adult for a few years. But since he got his Red Seal chef and settled down and got married and they've had a baby, his diet is probably better than mine. Right? And so this is not the accumulation of toxins. This is that map of inherent predispositions of areas we would want to pay attention to in order to support his body as he gets older. Again, so these all suggest, this brown pigment suggests that it's the liver that is inherently wanting to be out of balance. Where it's sitting tells us which other organs are bearing the brunt of that stress. And in constitutional iridology, we actually would not look at each and every individual pigment location, because knowing that the organ that sits in this reaction field would be under stress from the liver doesn't help us a lot. It may explain symptoms, but I'm probably not going to recommend a therapy or a remedy for this particular organ. It makes a whole lot more sense instead to look at the liver, doesn't it? To address the root of the problem, not the symptom of the problem. So that is what we do. We look and we go, oh, we've got a lot of liver markers. We want to support the liver. We want to modify the diet in this way. We maybe want to add these herbs as support. And only if an organ is showing really significant symptoms of stress from the liver involvement will we actually go in and do specific nutritional or herbal support there. You know, you might do some dietary things because those are pretty easy, but I would not be throwing fistfuls of supplements at the organs that might be stressed out. Another thing that can happen is the lipemic diathesis can appear, and it can become more opaque, or it can expand its circumnavigation. All right, so the lipemic diathesis is actually a corneal sign. It's not in the iris, it's in the cornea. And if you've been with me for the eye anatomy little webinar I did, you'll know where the cornea is in relation to the iris. We rarely see the lipemic diathesis in people who are under the age of 20. And if we see it under then, we do some serious work. We're not ever going to get rid of it. It's always going to be there as a reminder that we need to be doing the right things to support this body. We often see it in people over the age of 60, and at that age, it may be natural aging of the cornea. And this is where, as iridologists, if we start working with the client sooner than that, before this actually appears, and it doesn't appear in everybody, but then doing photographs annually, mostly to track things like lipemic diathesis, the acquisition of pigment, the development of different blood vessels and things that can happen in the sclera as well, then that's a wise thing to do. The age of the onset of the lipemic diathesis typically dictates what we need to do to correct underlying imbalances that this marker indicates. Again, we're not going to dissolve this marker. It's not going to go away. That's not what iridology is all about. We want instead to be working on the root cause of the problem and sorting out what is going on so that we can restore health at that foundational level. Another thing that we sometimes see is that the pupil may change shape. Now, the pupil is really dynamic. It's a slow reactor, but it's very dynamic. And it correlates to the spinal alignment and the nerve feed that exits from and enters into the spinal cord. Flattenings in the pupil, like this right here, suggest long-standing subluxations. Now, as you know, your bones are very dynamic and they are constantly remodeling. So if you've got a subluxation in your spine, say in your neck, that a lot of people get as they get older, where their head starts to jut forward, right? The longer the body holds that position, the more the bones reshape to support that position, right? And so when we see a flattening in the iris, in the pupil rather, that's going to take an awful lot of body work. So whether you use Dorn therapy or whether you use chiropractic or whether you use some other spinal alignment technique, we're going to have to constantly be putting those bones back where they belong, getting them lined up properly in order for the body to remodel and take the bones back to a healthier shape. So when we see this, we know we need to recommend that the client do some spinal alignment work, maybe some emotional work to go with that, some supplements to help those bones remodel a little more quickly. And eventually, over years, possibly decades, you will begin to see the pupil becoming rounder as the spinal alignment is locked in and as the nerve feed processes are helped along because of that. It's amazing when we see these flattenings, and I suggest to my clients, do you have problems in whichever the corresponding part of the spine is? They go, oh yeah, I'm always getting that adjusted. Well, we know why. We can see it there, and it probably needs more frequent aligning than what they're getting. Ways irides do not change. I was taught way back at the very beginning that when we had healing happening, we would see healing lines appear. That the lines inside a lacuna were healing lines. Now, here's a couple of things about that. I never once saw a lacuna that was actually completely empty. Never, ever in my 40 years have I seen that. I also, with photography, have never seen more lines come up inside a lacuna. Healing lines don't happen. These fibers that are in here have always been there, and they always will be there. Remember that the iris is made up of layers of fibers stacked up on each other, and that when we're seeing a lacuna, it means that the fiber on the top has an opening, but we're actually, the other fibers that we're seeing are fibers that have always been there, and they're just in the lower layers. So all we're doing here is looking at fibers that are one layer down from the surface or 2 layers down from the surface, pretty close to the top anyways. So we're not going to see healing fibers. And in a week or two, or sometime soon, I'm doing the little webinar where I show x-rays of my badly broken arm from this past year and the concurrent iris photos that prove that there's no such thing as healing lines. Lacunae, or if you're a Jensenian, you might call these lesions, lacunae do not get smaller. In one of the original North American Iridology classes that I took, they had a picture similar to this and a picture similar to that. And they said, same person, and look at how much smaller the lacuna is. And I want you to think for a minute about how inaccurate that truly is. When we see this, and these are 3 images of the very same eye, these 2 were taken minutes apart. This was taken a while, like later on when I got my new camera. And this is what we see when we've got all of these fibers or trabeculae in the eye. If you can imagine, if you've got a piece of spaghetti and you've got it stretched out this long, but now you need to fit it into a space that's this long, and you do this with it, what's going to happen to that piece of spaghetti? It's going to do this, right? Or it's going to move. If you've got the piece of spaghetti laid on the table, if you imagine this is a flat table and this is the spaghetti is going to do this roughly, right? It's going to bend. And it didn't actually get shorter, but it got bent. And so that's what we've got here, is we've got this very narrow area with these trabeculae that have been compressed into a short distance, and that makes the lacunae appear wider. As the pupil gets smaller, that lacuna gets longer and narrower. And that's what we see here. The lacuna is beginning to get longer from side to side, narrower from top to bottom. When we have the pupil shrunk down because of bright light, we have that exact same lacuna right here, as they are all the same, but notice how much longer they are and how much shallower they are. So this, again, we need to remember that lacunae do not get smaller. You're not going to do a cleanse that erases a lacuna. It just doesn't happen because it is inherently set. Diet does not change genetic structure. It changes gene activation. Does that make sense? Right? It doesn't change genetic structure. It changes gene activation. And so as we look at this, again, we've got the color difference from the different cameras. We cannot say cleansing has happened. We've got the different size of lacuna, which tells us that the lighting has changed and therefore the pupil size has changed. And that is what makes some lacunae look smaller. They're not actually smaller at all. So those are some ways that irides change. You can accumulate pigment, you can accumulate a lipemic diathesis, you can have brighter light that changes the pupil size and therefore slightly changes the lay and the shape of the lacunae and the trabeculae in the eyes. So those are the key ways that the irides may change. I'm just going to give you a little heads up here that the next session, the next 40-hour course in iridology, constitutional iridology, will be starting on Wednesday, January 15th at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. That's correct. We will be Mountain Standard at that point in time. And registration is not yet open, but if you are interested in being kept apprised of the details of that, please either go to iridology.education, and where that little pop-up is that says, get this fabulous iridology map, enter your information there, or just send me an email to judith@cobblestonehealth.com. And I will make sure you get on the right email list to be notified when registration is going to open. People who are on the list will get advance notice and will get the first chance to register before anybody else. And that could be important because I limit my classes to no more than 10 students. Classes are online, taught by live webinar. So like this, only completely on the Zoom format. And again, my classes are kept small so that you get all of the individual attention you need. So if you're interested in getting on that list, iridology.education, or shoot me an email and I will make sure you get where you want to go. I hope you will join me again on Friday at 12 noon Mountain Standard Time. I don't even remember what my topic is Friday, but we will be doing another one of these Instagram lives and Zoom webinars. And if we can get Facebook to cooperate, we might live stream it there too, because that's always fun. Have a fabulous day, and I will see you around. Bye for now.